I'm not going to preach this evening. I just want to tell you a story like we used to have at Vespers a long time ago when Eddie and all, when we were younger. We used to have some good storytellers like Mrs. Sargunam and some visiting people like Pauline David. And we used to love those Vesper nights when we used to listen to real moving stories. I don't know whether this story is true or not, but it has always touched me, and whenever I read it, it touches me, and I want to share that with you this evening. The little instrument on the table by the inspector's desk went tick-tock, and then it stopped as though considering how it should word the message it had to give. It was very still in the charge room of the police station on a lonely street in London. So still that the clock above the fireplace was audible. That and the squeaky scratching of the inspector's pen as it moved slowly over the yellow paper on the desk before him were the only sounds in the room. Outside, like most London nights, it was raining softly, and the streets were deserted, and the lines of lamps stretching east and west emphasized the loneliness. Tick-tock, said the instrument on the table excitedly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The inspector's high stool creaked as he sat up, listening. There was a constable at the door, and he too heard the frantic call. "What's that, Gill?" demanded the inspector testily. The constable came into the charge room with heavy footsteps. Tickety, tickety, tick-tock, babbled the instrument, and the constable started writing the message. All stations arrest and detain George Thomas on ticket of leave, aged 35, height 5 feet 8 inches, complexion and hair dark, eyes brown, of gentlemanly appearance, suspected of being concerned in warehouse robbery. Walthamstow and Canning Town especially note this and acknowledge. In the middle of the night, grumbled the inspector despairingly. They call me up to tell me what I've been telling them for hours and hours. What a system. Outside in the thin rain, a man was coming along the street, his hands deep in his pockets, his coat collar turned up, and his head on his breast, trying to shield himself as much as possible from the cold rain. He shuffled along, his boots squelching, and he slackened his pace as he came up near the steps of the police station. The policeman he expected to see at the door was absent because it was raining. The man stood uneasily at the foot of the steps, set his teeth, and mounted slowly. He halted again in the passage, out of which the charge room opened, and he overheard the conversation between the inspector and the constable. "It's a rum thing about Thomas," said the inspector's voice. "I thought he was trying to go straight. You see, Thomas was let out on parole, and then he had gone and done this robbery of the warehouse." "It's his wife, sir," said the constable. And there was a long silence broken by the loud ticking of the clock. "Then why did his wife give him away?" asked the inspector. "Did she, sir?" The constable was surprised. But the man in the passage did not hear the surprise in his voice. He was leaning against the painted wall, his hand at his throat, his thin, unshaven face a dirty white, his lips trembling. "She gave him away," said the inspector. He spoke with the deliberation of a man enjoying the sensation of dispensing exclusive news. "You know her?" "Slightly, sir," said the policeman, the constable. "Handsome woman. She might have done better than Thomas," said the inspector. "I think she has," said the constable, and they both laughed. The man in the passage crept quietly back out of the station. He was shaking in every limb. He almost fell at the last step and clutched the railings that bordered the station house to keep himself erect. The rain was pouring down, but he did not notice it. He was paralyzed by what he had overheard. He had broken into the warehouse because she had laughed to scorn his attempt at reformation. He had tried to go straight, and she made him go crooked. And then, when the job was done, with all the old cleverness, so that he left no trace of his entry and breaking in, she had gone straight to the police and put him away. But that was nothing. Women had done such things before, out of jealousy, in a fit of insane anger at some slight, real or imagined. But she had done it deliberately, wickedly, because she loved some other man better than she loved her husband. He was cool now, seeing things very clearly as he walked in the rain, holding his head erect as he had in the days when he was junior in a broker's office, and she had been a novel-reading miss in Balham. The rain streamed down his face, the cuffs of his thin jacket clung to his wrists, and his trousers were soaked from thigh to ankle. He knew a little shop off Commercial Road where they sold cheese and butter and wood and such stuff. He had purchased for a penny a morsel of bread and cheese many a time from there. And he remembered the woman behind the counter in that little shop. She used a big, sharp knife to cut the cheese. He thought the matter out as he turned in the direction of the shop. Such knives are usually kept in a drawer next to the till, with the bacon saw and the milk tester and the little rubber stamp which is used for branding margarine in accordance with the law. He knew the shop would be shuttered at this time of night, the door would be locked, and he had no instrument to open the door because he left his kit in the warehouse. He gulped down a sob. There must be a way. The knife was necessary. He was still weak from his last term of penal servitude. He could not kill her with his hands. She was so strong and beautiful. Thinking disconnectedly, he came to the shop. It stood in a little side street, and there was one street lamp giving light to the thoroughfare. There was no sound but the dismal drip of the rain. There was a skylight above the shuttered door. It was the only way. He saw that at once. Sometimes these are left unfastened. He stood on tiptoe and gingerly felt along the lower part of the sash. His fingers encountered something that lay on the ledge, and his heart leapt. It was a key. He had guessed this to be a lock-up shop. You know, the last person leaves and locks up and leaves the key somewhere. He knew enough of the casual character of these little shopkeepers not to be surprised at the ease with which an entry might be effected. He slipped the key in the lock, turned it, and stepped in, closing the door behind him softly. The air of the shop was hot and stuffy, full of the pungent scent of foodstuffs, cheese and ham, and the resinous odor of firewood. He had matches in his pocket, but they were sodden and would not strike. He fumbled around the shelves in the dark and came upon a packet of matches. He struck a light, guarding the flame with his hand. The shop had been swept clean and made ready for the night. The weights had been neatly arranged on either side of the scales, and there was a piece of muslin laid over the butter on the slab. On the counter, conspicuously displayed, was a note. It contained instructions written in pencil in a large, uneducated hand, written to Fred. He was to light the fire, put the kettle on, take in the milk, and serve Mrs. Smith. Fred was the boy who worked in the shop, the early comer in the morning, for whom the key had been placed. It was remarkable that he settled all these particulars to his own satisfaction. He kept thinking all these things as he was breaking and entering into the shop. Lighting match after match, he sought the heavy knife with the sharp point and the newly whetted edge. He even felt a certain exultation in the ease with which he had gained admission to the shop, and had an insane desire to whistle and talk. He found the knife. It was under the counter like he imagined and guessed, with a greatly scarred cutting board and a steel sharpener. He wrapped the knife carefully in a sheet of newspaper and then remembered he was hungry. He broke off a wedge of cheese, and there was no bread, but an open tin of children's biscuits was handy. With the food in his hand and the knife in his pocket, he continued his exploration. Behind the shop was a little parlor, and the door was unlocked, and he entered. He struck match after match, hesitated a moment, and then lit the gas light. It was a tiny room, cheaply but neatly furnished. There were china ornaments on the mantel shelf, a few cheap lithographs on the wall, and another loudly ticking clock like the one in the police station. He made a grimace as though he were in pain, felt with his hand for the knife, and smiled. He sat at the little table in the middle of the room and ate the biscuits and the cheese mechanically, staring hard at the wall in front of him, at nothing in particular, the thoughts just going through his mind. He had done everything for her. His first crime, the few sovereigns extracted from the cash box, she had inspired that. Her little follies, her little extravagances, her vanities, these had been at the bottom of every step he had taken. Still staring blankly at the wall with wide open eyes, he traced his descent from a decent person to what he had become. There was a text on the wall among all the lithographs, and he had been staring at it all the time, but not really realizing what it was. It was an ill-printed text, black and gold, green and vivid crimson, sadly out of register, and bearing in the bottom left-hand corner the conspicuous confession that it was printed in Saxony. His thoughts were elaborate thoughts, but inclined to dive sideways into inconsequent bypaths. Insensibly, he had fixed his eyes on the text in a subconscious attempt to concentrate his thoughts. One half of his brain pursued the deadly course of retrospection, and the other half grappled half-heartedly with the words on the wall. He read only those that were in capital letters: Behold, Lamb, God. 3 years penal servitude for burglary, 2 terms of 6 months each for breaking and entering. She had been at his elbow. Years ago, he had been a member of a church, sang in the choir, and religious matters had some significance to him. It is strange how such things drop away from a grown man, how the sweet bloom of faith is rubbed off. He married her at a registry office in Marylebone and they went to Brighton for their honeymoon. She knew well enough that he could not afford to live there as they were living. He had never dreamt that she guessed he was robbing his employer, and he did it for her. Behold, lamb. His eyes were still staring at the wall. Might religion have helped him had he kept closer to his teachings? He wondered, slowly munching the biscuits and cheese, with his eyes on the garish text, not really reading it. He found some milk and drank it, and then he got up. Where he had sat, there were 2 pools of water, one on the floor and the other on the table where his sleeve had rested. He turned out the light and walked softly through the shop, listened, and opened the door very carefully. There was nobody in sight, and so he stepped out, closing and locking the door behind him, and he put the key back on the ledge where he had found it, and quickly walked back to the main road, the heavy knife still in his pocket, bumping against his thigh with every step he took. He had an uneasy feeling as he had stepped out of the shop and got onto the main road, and he strove to analyze it to a first cause. He decided it was that text, and he smiled. Then, of a sudden, the smile froze on his lips. He was not alone. A man had come from the night, swiftly, silently, and walked with him, step for step. He stopped dead in his tracks, and his hand slid to the pocket where he had the knife. "What do you want?" he asked the stranger. The other made no reply. His face was in the shadow. What clothes he wore, what manner of man he was, George Thomas could not say, only that standing there, he was tall, gracefully proportioned, easy of movement. There was a silence. Then, "Come," said the man from the night, and the burglar accompanied him without question. They walked in silence, and Thomas observed that the burglar moved in the direction that he himself was planning to take. "I shall give myself up afterwards," he was speaking feverishly. "I will end all this, end it, end it." It did not strike him as curious that he should plunge into his most secret thoughts, revealing the most innermost thoughts of his heart. He accepted without wonder the conviction that the stranger knew everything. "She led me down from step to step, down, down," sobbed Thomas as they walked side by side through the narrow streets that led to the river. "It used to worry me at first, but she strangled my conscience. She laughed at my fears. She is a devil, I tell you." Other men have said, "The woman tempted me," said the stranger. "Yet a man has thought and will of his own." Thomas shook his head doggedly. "I had no will where she was concerned. When I have killed her, I shall be a man again." He tapped his pocket, and the knife was still there. "If we had children, it might have been different, but she hated children." "If you were free of her, you might be a man," said the stranger. "Yes, yes," the other turned on him eagerly. "That's what I mean. She's in my way. If I kill her, I can start all over again, can't I? I could go back and face the world and say, 'I've killed the bad part of me. Give me another chance.' Look," he fumbled in his pocket and brought forth the knife. The rain came pitter-patter on the paper wrapping, and his hand trembled in his excited eagerness to display the strong blade with the silvery edge and the needle-like point. "I could not kill her with my bare hands." So I got this knife. I feel I've got to do it, though I hate killing things. I once killed a rabbit when I was a little kid, and it haunted me for days. If you were free of her, you might be a man, said the stranger again. Yes, yes, that's what I'm saying. I could go back to the old people. I don't even know whether they are alive. He was referring to his parents. They turned corner after corner, crossing main streets, diving through narrow alleys where costers' barrows were stacked, chained wheel to wheel, into mean streets and across patches of waste grounds. Once, through a little passage, they came in sight of the river, and they saw 3 barges moored side by side, rising and falling slowly with the tide. Out in mid-river, a steamer lay, 3 lights glimmering feebly. I shall go into the house from the back, said Thomas. There's nobody else in the house but an old woman there. My wife sleeps in the front room. If you were free of her, you might be a man, said the stranger. Yes, yes, yes. The convict was impatient now. I know that when I am free. He laughed happily. She dragged you down to the deeps, said the man of the night softly. Every step you took for good, she clogged and hindered. That's right, that's the truth, said the convict. Yet I could never escape her. But you were loyal and faithful and kind, said the stranger. God knows that's true, said the man, and wept. For better or worse, for richer or poorer. And it seemed to him that the stranger was saying these words at the same time as he was. At last they reached a street that was more dark, more wretched than any of its neighbors. The man stopped at a narrow passage which led to the back of the house. I'm going in now, he said simply. You wait for me here. And when I come back, we will start a new life all over again. I shall kill her quickly. The man of the night made no reply, and Thomas went through the passage, turned at right angles along a narrow strip of path between wooden fences, and so came to a rickety gate at the back. He opened it and went in. He was in a dirty little yard littered with the jettison of a poor household. There was a tumble-down fowl run, and as he walked stealthily to the house, a cock crew loudly. The back room was empty, just as he expected. He pushed up the window. It squeaked a little. He waited for the cock to crow again and mask the sound, and then he swung himself over the windowsill and entered the room. The point of the knife cut through the thin clothing he wore, and he felt a sharp pain as he put his leg over the window. So he took the knife from his pocket and felt the edge. And then he became conscious of the fact that there was somebody in the room. He gripped the knife tightly and peered into the darkness. Who's there? He whispered. It is I, said a voice he knew, the voice of the man in the night. How did you get in? I came with you, said the voice. Let us free ourselves of this woman. She dragged you down. She is the weed that chokes your soul. Yes, yes, Thomas whispered. And reaching out, he found the stranger's hand. And hand in hand, they came to the woman's room. A cheap night light was burning on the mantel shelf, and she lay with one bare arm thrown out of bed, and her chest rose and fell regularly as she slept. He had seen something else that rose and fell recently. What was it? Oh, those barges on the river. She was handsome in a coarse way, and as she slept, she smiled. Some movement of the man next to him disturbed her, for she stirred and murmured a name. It was not the name of the man who stood above her, a knife in his hand. Do you love her? The stranger's voice was very soft. The husband shook his head. Once I thought so, now. Do you hate her? I do not hate her. I served her because it was my duty. "Come," said the stranger, and they left the room together. Thomas unfastened the street door, and they passed again into the dreary night. "I do not love her, I do not hate her," he said again, half to himself. "I went to her because it was my duty. I worked and stole, and she betrayed me. So I thought I would kill her." The knife was still in his hand. In silence, they traversed the way they came, until they reached a little passage that led to the river, and they turned into this little passage. At the end of the passage was a flight of stone steps, and they heard the dug of water as it washed over the steps. And Thomas raised his hand and sent the knife spinning into the river. And a voice hailed him from the foot of the steps. He didn't expect that. "That you, Cole?" His heart almost stopped beating. The voice was hard and metallic. "Is that you, Cole? Who is it?" Thomas saw a boat at the bottom of the stairs. There were 4 men in it, and one was holding fast with a boat hook to an iron ring let into the stone steps. "Me," said Thomas without saying his name. "It ain't Cole," said another voice disgustedly. "Cole won't turn up. He's probably drunk." There was a whispering in the boat, and then an authoritative voice demanded, "Want a job, my lad?" Thomas went down 2 more steps and bent forward. "Yes, I want a job." A querulous voice said something about missing the tide. "Can you cook?" "Yes, I can cook." He had been employed as a cook in prison. He didn't tell the men that. "Jump in, we'll sign you on tomorrow. We are going to Valparaiso. How does that strike you?" Thomas went silent. "I don't want to come back here." "We'll get another man for the return voyage. Jump in." And so he got into the boat awkwardly, and the officer at the stern gave an order. The boat pushed off, and then the thief remembered the man of the night. He could see him plainer than ever he had seen him before. He was a radiant figure standing on the dark edge of the water. His hands outstretched in farewell. Thomas saw the face, beautiful and benevolent. And then the words came to him, "Behold, the Lamb of God." "Goodbye, sir, goodbye." "Who are you talking to, man?" "I'm talking to the stranger on the shore. Can you not see him?" "Nobody's there, man. You were by yourself." "15 years ago, my mom passed away. And this is one of her favorite texts. Behold, the Lamb of God. Be still and know that I am God. I'm sorry. Be still. And Eddie was driving me to the airport. And my thoughts were kind of churning around. And all of a sudden in front of me, I saw this car. I don't know if Eddie noticed it, but the tag said, "Be still and know that I'm God," in abbreviated form. And those words are on her tombstone. We all may not be like the thief this evening, but we all have problems. We all have difficulties, different kinds. We have a family that has lost a loved one. They are grieving too. But the Word of God comes to us clearly, and it says, "Be still and know that I am God. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. What do we do when we have these burdens? What do we do when we have problems and difficulties? Do we look to Jesus? Do we cast our burdens on him? Can we see him standing in the shadows? He is there all the time, day and night. If you reach out, you can touch him, you can feel him, and you can hold his hand, and he will lead you to a better life. And he will solve your problems for you. He will comfort you. He will give you rest. He will give you peace. And he will take us all to heaven very soon. May this be our privilege. It is my prayer for every one of you that you will be still and know that he is God. Behold, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sins of the world.